All right, this is great to talk about books. I love this. I went to one of the other ones, a couple of them, and it's just wonderful to do. A different sense of community, I think. I come out of a certain tradition that I'm going to talk about toward the end of my comments about why I do the kind of things that I do. And basically, it's someone who comes out of an organizing tradition, activist tradition, for 6 years before going to graduate school. So I started teaching late in my life, and my formative experiences were with the people that are in this book. So I've written 5 books now. This is the 6th one. They're all in a stream. So they start back in the 1920s and 30s with segregation in the South in a book called Southern Labor and Black Civil Rights. And it was an opening into a period of time that nobody had really studied in the South. Everybody thinks there's no unions in the South, but there was huge struggles in the South. One reason it's so repressive in the South is because of those huge struggles. They had to put people down. And we saw that during the Civil Rights Movement, but it also happened in the labor movement. Then I did a book of oral histories with Black workers, which was a mind-blowing thing for me. And then finally this book, Going Down Jericho Road, which is in the back, which got the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award and a lot of other awards, because nobody had really done this either. It was about a different way of looking at King and looking at the whole civil rights experience. Usually people talk about King like from 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott to 1965, the Voting Rights Act, 64, the Civil Rights Act. And then suddenly he takes this strange turn, toward radicalism. He comes out against the Vietnam War. He starts the Poor People's Campaign. He goes into a big strike in Memphis and advocates a general strike of all the workers in Memphis, just like a real labor leader, And so it could be puzzling to most people, students even, which guy is King? Or worse is what we call misremembering King, thinking of him only in that first frame. And so this book takes you to 1968, but it goes back into the deep reasons for this strike. And what it tells you is that the civil rights movement was never only the civil rights movement. It was always about economic justice, people's daily lives, organizing on the job, the conditions of Black workers, conditions of white workers. And it takes you deeply into that story. April 4th will be 50 years since that story. I'll be going to Memphis. We'll be having marches. We'll be having huge events. Atlanta, I'll be going there too. You're going to see a lot of publicity about 50 years since King. And so then the question is, how do people remember? How do they remember King? And the misremembering is King as the guy in the suit at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. As this one tells you, this is trying to present King in a more complex way, but short. I mean, the book actually won't come out until April 4th, but it's a nice, short little book, which I'm so happy. I finally wrote a short book. And so scholars know this material. They know the complex King, but the general public usually does not. And a lot of kids get bored to death. I have a dream hearing it over and over again. And they think, yeah, I've got a dream. Is that it? There's so much more. Well, what is the dream? What is the dream? And so this book, Beyond King's Dream of Civil and Voting Rights, lay a revolutionary vision of economic justice. So we're trying to explain to people, what does it mean to be a minister who's also a revolutionary? And that may seem overstated, because King is always in his suit and tie, it seems, and he's very proper, his diction's perfect and everything. But actually what I found is that he was deeply rooted in the labor movement in the 50s and 60s, and that his parents were sharecroppers previously, his grandparents were slaves previously. He came out of that same era that I had studied earlier, about, African Americans in the South during the segregation era, and splitting whites and blacks against each other. And the reason W.W. Norton really pushed, and I had to kill myself almost literally to get the book done, they wanted it to come out for April 4th. And so they're going to be really circulating it. And we're doing the best we can to use this as a platform to tell a story. So we're going to do that on May 1st, which is a workers' holiday, at Phillip Hall in Tacoma, and we're going to do it on May 9th at Town Hall in Seattle. So just a couple of quick comments about the story. One is that the misunderstanding of King also is a misunderstanding of the movement. People know about Rosa Parks, okay. The people that really powered the movement were working class people. In Montgomery, Alabama, 80% of the people who rode on the buses were black women who worked in white people's homes. In Memphis, in the 1968 strike, 80% of black workers worked in laboring jobs. 80% of black women worked in white people's homes. These are working class movements that are aiming at civil rights. And King says his analysis is two phases, that the civil rights movement was only one phase, and people don't get this. Conservatives like to say, oh, we solved those problems. And King says, no, we just opened up the door so that we have rights, so that we can do something about it. The opening the door is to what he called economic justice. But he went beyond that. You have to think of King, if you want to understand him, as a revolutionary in two contexts. One, he was tied in with the labor movement, and this is Highlander Center, which was the founding place for a lot of the movements in that time period. And interestingly, what you find is King is immediately attacked as a communist, the most famous Baptist minister in the world as a communist, and this was over and over again, and that's part of what led to his death, was a real right-wing animosity to King. And then when he came out against the Vietnam War, it was that much worse. And he started making really strong connections between racism, poverty, and war. And so the book takes you through that, and it also helps you to understand that at the root of it is nonviolence. That nonviolence is itself radical because it reforms your whole understanding of what's going on in the world if you start from that framework. And so I try to give people an overview of that, something that people can grab onto that isn't a 500-page book. Ends up with the Memphis sanitation strike, of course, where King is killed, and some brilliant speeches that he made at the very end of his life in Memphis. And that's the title of the book, To the Promised Land. That was his last speech on April 3rd before he was killed the next day. We're going to have an event on April 4th here, marking 50 years since King, where we're going to ring a bell. People are going to do that all over the country at the time King was killed. So last thing is I'd like you to know that this comes out of the activist tradition. So when you read this kind of material from me, yes, I'm a scholar trained at Howard University and other universities, but my framework starts out with this and sort of ends with this. And I don't try to hide it when I teach, and I don't try to hide it in the book, and I don't think I'm biased. I just know what I'm talking about. Okay, thank you.